everyone. Welcome to the Asian Hustle Network podcast. Today we have a very special guest with us. His name is Tim Wu, a wildly innovative producer, artist, and songwriter fusing melodic electronic dance music with pop, blues, rock, and other genres. Elephante, American musical artist Tim Wu, is living what many people might call the American dream. As a son of Taiwanese immigrants, his Asian American upbringing in Michigan was unique and sometimes isolating. He graduated from Harvard University and entered corporate America at a top global consultant firm and hated it. So he addressed his unhappiness, the elephant in the room, and pursued his passion in music. To date, he's garnered hundreds of millions of streams across his two indie EPs, I Am the Elephante, a 9-track exploration of progressive house, synth pop, and trap, and Glass Mansion, which shot to #1 on iTunes, US Dance Chart. His upcoming project, Heavy Glow, represents his first full-length studio album, a largely solo effort further pushing the boundaries of dance music, featuring the debut single, High Water. Elephante has headlined 2 sold-out national tours, played nightlife residencies, including those at Hard Rock and Wynn Las Vegas, and appeared at major music festivals such as Lollapalooza, EDC Las Vegas, and Electric Zoo. And this just in, we just got word that Tim is now an officially and fully signed 88 Rising artist. So congratulations and welcome to the show, Tim.
Wow, thank you. That was quite the intro. Do you want to write my Wikipedia page for me? That was excellent.
Tim, how's it feel hearing that list of accomplishment in your intro and seeing how far you come? You know, it's amazing. Shout out to you. And we want to hop right into it. The first question: tell us about yourself and your upbringing.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, that's in music, you're always kind of looking for the next thing, right? And so it feels. I haven't thought about a lot of that stuff, but when you put it like that, it feels pretty nice. But yeah. Growing up, I had a pretty typical Asian American upbringing. My parents immigrated to the U.S. from Taiwan. I grew up in Michigan, in Ann Arbor. Growing up, I did a lot of the, stereotypical Asian American things. I played tennis. I did a lot of academic stuff, but I was also classically trained in piano, as Asian parents are want to do. My brother took the violin, so I was on piano. But yeah, that was kind of, I grew up, and school is very important, like everyone, but for me, music was always kind of the thing that I was doing on my own. I started playing guitar in middle school and started writing songs around then, and my idol was John Mayer, and so I was, I learned guitar too by learning how to play Continuum and like Red Hot Chili Peppers and shit like that. And yeah, it was. I always loved music, and it was the kind of thing that I would always just make time for. But I think looking back now, there was really like a hole or like a mental block where, growing up Asian American, becoming a musician isn't a thing, right? It's not an option, right? You go to college and you become a doctor, you become a lawyer, you get a job, whatever. You get something stable and you start a family, and like that's your life path. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's no shame in that. And I spent most of my early life kind of going down that path, but then music was always this thing that was on the back of my mind, and it was the thing that even in college, I would make time for, and I would, skip class to go work on music, and skip out on parties with my friends, and I was managing the campus studio, and it was always just, I dragged my friends out to shitty open mics, and it was always just this thing. In retrospect, it was so obvious that it was my passion. It was the thing I wanted to do, but part of me didn't really believe it was possible. And it wasn't until after I graduated and got a, very stable, well-respected job and was really unhappy that I was finally like, look, man, I gotta give this music thing a shot or else I'm never gonna forgive myself. So I took the leap, and it was one of the scariest things I've ever done. And I was lucky that things worked out, and I'm here now.
Yeah, I mean, shout out to you, man. It's a lot of people never take that jump, and a lot of people are still very unhappy with their job still. And the fact that you realize that at an early age and be like, hey, I'm gonna regret it or not be happy if I don't pursue it. I mean, that's awesome. And I think it's a common theme too with a lot of artists that we have in the podcast. It's like the first prerequisite that before we pursue our passions that we have to graduate college and then get a job and then realize that we hate it, right? I think that's just an Asian thing to do to satisfy the requirement of our parents. It's like, no, hey, look, mom, I finished college. If I fail, I still have my degree. I can go for it, right? And that's like the culture thing I realized in our podcast too, where it's like when you listen to other podcasts, they're like, oh, I dropped out after high school and dropped out of middle college, start pursuing my passions. But for most Asian American artists and actresses and actors, they had to finish college first and then pursue their dreams.
Yeah, I mean, the parental pressure is definitely part of it, but I think it's just broadly the entire culture that you're raised in, right? It's this growing up, there wasn't anyone who looked like me who's doing the things I wanted to do, right? And I think there's a big like sort of subconscious message that comes through, right? Where it's like every Asian person that that's older is, a doctor or a lawyer or some kind of professional, like works in a restaurant, whatever. They're like a business owner. There are all these sort of stereotypes. And I think when you're growing up, at least when I was growing up, that was just the dominant conversation. There was no, we had Jackie Chan, right? He was like the one guy. And then we had John Cho, right? But then he was like the goofy guy in Harold and Kumar, right? And it was never like, there's no like cool, like, all the like Asian entertainers were kind of like goofy or funny or like the nerd on the TV show or whatever. And there wasn't, it wasn't until, the last few years where the representation really took off. And I think I'm excited for the next generation of like young Asian creatives to see that it is possible. Like you can do it. This is a thing that your story is worth telling, and your experiences are just as valid as any other Americans. And I'm just excited to see what happens with these all these young kids now.
Yeah, we definitely agree with you, and thank you so much for being one of the new pioneers coming up for our generation to see. We all look up to you, and leaving your comfortable job and hopping to basically entrepreneurship and hustling for yourself is extremely scary. What was going through your mind like the first day, first week, and what was your first win like before you realized that, hey, like I never had to come back to my full-time job, that I can actually pursue my passions full-time, right? Because that's the most difficult thing, because when you leave, you're constant paranoia, like how am I going to pay the bills? You're looking at your friends who have nice stable jobs, you're like, god damn it, that looks pretty awesome actually, but then I'm not happy, I'm not coming back, right? So what was your first day like, and your first week, and your first win like?
That's a great question, because they are very different. They're very far apart. I think the first day I quit my job, it was simultaneously terrifying, but it was also like the most liberating feeling. I feel like I finally took the first step to becoming the person I wanted to be, and that was really exciting. On the other hand, when you're starting off, I think anyone who's going into any kind of entrepreneurship, you almost need this completely irrational narcissism, psychotic belief in yourself that you're going to make it happen. And I know I had that. I remember one of the things that kind of took me over the edge is I had gotten my first offer to do an official remix that would go on Beatport. And I was getting paid $0, but I was like, I'm gonna be on Beatport, I'm gonna be on iTunes, like this is it. Like I'm ready, like, a year from now I'm gonna be Avicii. And spoiler alert, it's not how it works. And the next 18 months was basically me just sitting in my room, working on remixes and trying and like putting music out every 2 or 3 weeks and having everything put out like no one cared, right? Like get 500 plays on SoundCloud, get, I remember the first time I got 1,000 plays on SoundCloud. I was like, oh my God. And then the first time you get 10,000, right? And it was, it was just, there's progress, but it was so slow, right? And it goes up and down and up and down. And you're putting everything you have into everything you're making. And after every single song I'd put out, I'd be like, I don't know. This is literally the best I can possibly do. I don't know how I can possibly get better than this. And inevitably, it like would do. It may or may not have done better than the previous, but it was like, by no means was I made it, right? It was still just like I'm still just fighting for my life. And that was just like I was making no money and I was just like living off savings for a year and a half. And then I was like towards the end, I was getting pretty down. I was like, I don't know if this is going to work out for me, right? Like I've been doing this has been my entire life, and like I'm still making no money. And then I was pretty close to the breaking point, and then I put out a couple remixes that finally popped, and they got big on Hype Machine, which was the blog aggregator back in the mid 2010s, early 2010s, and like got my first like few million hits on SoundCloud. And this was kind of at the time where EDM and dance music was kind of popping off, and I signed with my agent to go on tour, and they started putting me on shows. And that was maybe the first time where I thought I had a shot, and I was like, oh, I can actually make money doing this. But there are always levels to it where you're like, even now I'm still like, well, the music industry is so uncertain, and there's never a moment where you're like, I am good. And the moments where you do feel like that, like something, the universe will put you back in your place. So it was, there are ups and downs where there's a point where I thought I was going to get dropped by my agency, where the music I was putting out wasn't doing very well. And then, I think the first real moment, well, there was a moment where Galantis, who I'm a huge fan of, and I looked up to them, they played one of my remixes for them at Ultra, and I was like, okay, this is like pretty fucking dope. But then that happens, that's amazing, you feel great about it, and then like 2 weeks later you realize like your life hasn't really changed, and you're like, okay, well, I guess maybe that's not it. But I think the first real one was when I heard people singing a song of mine at a show. That was like okay, I'm doing something that is resonating with fans. And I'm certainly no means all set. Like I was still living, show to show. But I was like, well, maybe I have maybe this can turn into a thing.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. Your story just gave me goosebumps because I every entrepreneur story is difficult, and the fact that you're so open with us and sharing your struggles. It's most of the time we look at you. I think when your team emailed us, we're just like, oh my God, like Elephante, it's so cool to have you on the show, But like just hearing your struggles years and years and years, it's this is like pre-TikTok days. So I have to say, like, distribution is much, much more difficult back then. So shout out to you for not quitting.
Yeah, I mean, this is like barely into Facebook time. Like Instagram didn't even exist when I first started. Spotify didn't really exist. It was still all SoundCloud. And yeah, I think that's a big thing whenever people ask me, do I have any advice? And that's a hard question for a couple of reasons, because times change, right? The industry is always shifting. If you the way I came up, no one would ever be able to mimic that path anymore. It's just the world doesn't, the infrastructure doesn't work that way anymore. So you're going to have to kind of just figure it out yourself. No one can tell you how to do it, but at the same time, it sounds kind of simple, but I always, like, my motto is you either make it or you quit. So just don't quit. And I was very lucky that it happened for me, and the time that it did, it was like, a couple of years. But for other people, it can be a lot longer than that. But at the end of the day, everyone has to grind for to get their foot in the door. And there's no real tangible plan specific actions that you can take that'll get you there. You just kind of have to keep banging on the door until it opens.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everyone's journey is going to look a little bit different. And like Brian said, your story gave me a lot of chills too, because, when you were feeling your lowest of the lows, how a lot of entrepreneurs feel when they're like running out of money and running out of runway. Some people never get out of that hump, right? Like, you really have to keep grinding and keep going until you see the light at the end of the tunnel. And even when you do, like your story, it just goes to show you just have to keep hustling, even when you've reached like a highlight, right? You just have to keep grinding it out. And then going back to, how you mentioned your parents kind of putting you into piano lessons and your brother into violin lessons. A lot of our Asian parents, they, put us into music lessons to kind of teach us discipline, right? But, and then a lot of us, we want to get out of those lessons, right? But for you, music kind of stuck with you. So what did your parents think about you quitting your job, your corporate job, and then going into music full time?
Yeah, it was, my parents were ultimately very supportive. It was a tricky conversation. My mom knew very much how miserable I was. I think for her, the math was like, well, he's really unhappy at his job. He's got to try something else. Like, he's got to figure it out. But it's funny, when I told my mom, she was like, that's fine, I support you, but just don't tell your dad yet. And I was like, okay. So I just, we kind of had this charade of where he would ask me how my job was going, and I'd just be like, good, and then we wouldn't talk about it anymore. And but at that point in my life, there's like nothing really my parents could tell me. It was like, this is something I have to do for myself, and that obviously was a difficult thing to kind of a big mental barrier to get over. But when I look back at that time, it doesn't feel like a choice. It was like it wasn't like like, oh, do I stay or do I go? It was like, well, I'm just not staying. So like it didn't even feel like a decision. So, and then it was like, well, given that, I have to make my parents see somehow. But I think a lot of it was ultimately that they just didn't understand, and I didn't even really understand how you like have a career as a musician, right? This is a thing you can do for a living. And it wasn't until, my dad started coming to shows and like seeing what it was, and kind of seeing the fans and being like, oh, they know your music and they really like you. And I'm like, yeah. And then he's like, oh, okay, I get it now. And I think for them, it was just they didn't, as long as they knew that I had a sustainable career and was like, not going to end up on the street, I think they then, they're totally supportive.
Yeah, I love that. It takes a while for Asian parents to sort of realize that this is a viable path, because from their perspective, it's like they sacrifice so much for us to have a stable career, right? They don't want us to go back to a state of uncertainty like they did. They're like, this is horrible, but you're like, this is the way I want to live life,
And that was one of the big sort of understandings that my parents came to, where it was an understanding on both sides, to where it was like, when I quit to make music, it was like so uncertain and so difficult and so stressful. And it kind of made me realize like what that was like for them. Like they left everything they ever knew to go to a country across the world to start a new life, right? And that was one of the big kind of understandings I came to my dad. Like a lot of the pressure that he put on me early on to, go to med school or whatever, it was because he was like, I didn't want you to have to go through what I did because it was so fucking hard. And it was like, I wanted to do this so you wouldn't have to. And I was like, I totally understand and respect that, but like, I have your genes. So like, like you really have no one to blame but yourself. So, and I think it was kind of like a game recognized game, sort of thing.
The apple doesn't fall too away from the tree.
Yeah.
But this is a pretty big week coming up for you, right? So at the time of this release the podcast, EDC is now this week, and you're performing at the main stage.
Yes, sir.
How does that feel? And before we even get there, it's like this is a really big week for you. Actually, you have a couple of releases coming out. Can you speak about those and tell us more about that and in preparation for EDC this week too?
Big week. My debut studio album is coming out. It's called Heavy Glow. It's my first signed label release. I'm with 88 Rising right now, which is super fucking exciting. And then, so first studio album, and then EDC main stage for the first time. It's one of those things where part of me is like just treating it like any other show, because if I really think about it too much, I'll be like, oh fuck. But yeah, it's just like a sort of culmination of everything that I've gone through in my career, and especially with the pandemic, to have it finally happen and kind of be like, oh, like, there's a moment during the pandemic where I was like, I don't know if I'll ever be able to play shows again. And then to kind of have this like big moment come is like, it's still a little surreal.
That is amazing. And, we're so excited for all of the great news. And like Brian said, this is such a big week for you. And like we mentioned, you being officially signed on to 88 Rising. What is going through your mind at this time right now? And can you explain just like the process of it and what you're currently feeling right now?
I want to hear raw emotions, like unfiltered. Just you feel free to use some profanity to describe your emotions, but you just want to capture it.
This might be disappointing, but honestly, if I've learned anything in the industry, it's you have to keep an even keel. You got to be very grateful. I'm so grateful for everything I've done and all the help I've gotten to get to where I am. But the music industry is so volatile, and like, great things will happen when you're at your lowest, and you'll think you're fucking crushing it, and everything will come crashing down. And it's just, that's how it happens. And so, like, to preserve my sanity, I've had to just be like, can't get too high, can't get too low. Of course, I'm incredibly excited for everyone to hear the new music and see the new show and all of that, and it's all great things. But I can't. I've ridden high before and had it crash down. So it is, there's I think for any of my peers who have been doing it for a long time, it's like a very similar thing. It's like, yeah, man, you just gotta stay in the moment, be grateful and excited about what you're gonna do, but you don't put too many expectations on something that hasn't happened yet. So.
Yeah, thank you for your level-headed approach to this. I mean, it's a lot of us are, ride the clouds too high or ride it too low. And, it's same thing in entrepreneurship, right? You always don't know what's tomorrow. The landscape could totally change, like the pandemic last year. So yeah. I really appreciate that grounded mindset. And, if you see someone wearing like a pink hat or blue hat at EDC stage, that might be me and Maggie, it's cheering you on. And there somewhere. I may or may not have a shirt on, depending on how cold it is.
Oh my God.
I'm just kidding.
Sure, it's definitely optional at EDC.
Yeah, so I know you touched upon this a little bit too, but keeping your mental sanity at an even state, right? Because there's probably a lot of things that come in your direction, and like you said, like there's a lot of things that you can or cannot control. Like how do you take care of your mental health, especially in the music industry, right? Because earlier you mentioned Avicii, and I'm a huge fan of Avicii. I've been following him for a very long time, and seeing his ups and downs with his mental health and physical health and everything. it's really heartbreaking, right? And for me, when I look at you, you are extremely rising artist. Like, I'm gonna see you like a Vici level in the next few years. I'm pretty sure of that. How do you take care of yourself and your mental health and really take time for yourself and take care of everything?
It's hard. I think it's a journey and a process for everyone. Um, I think it's just like a lot of lessons learned throughout. It's almost just like a survival instinct. I've had several points in my career where uh, I was like, I don't know if I can do this anymore, and you you just kind of learn to kind of roll with it, and especially during the pandemic, um, that there for performers, it was like this might be the end of the road, right? Like I was fortunate in that I was able to kind of hang on and hang on through, but I had friends who had to sell houses, had to take out loans, had like quit entirely. Um, but I think taking care of your physical health is really important. Getting enough sleep. After my first really big tour, I was still like partying after shows and was still, going out a lot. And I had like a complete breakdown. I was like, I can't fucking do this anymore. Um, so that's one. I would say I started therapy during the pandemic, which I highly recommend to everyone. Um, it's, I think taking that time to invest in yourself and not thinking about it as a weakness. Everyone needs help. And Yeah, I think it's just a long process of learning to, love yourself, as corny as that sounds, and have compassion and forgiveness for yourself. Um, I think, yeah, it's a journey, and I think being an artist, I am particularly predisposed to emotional highs and lows. But you have to just remember why you're doing it, and the remembering the things that you love about it, outside of any sort of external factors. Because to me, ultimately, it's about making the music and making music that means something to me, and hoping that it means something to people who listen to it. Um, with everything else that goes on, like, you just gotta hold that as your North Star.
Yeah, I love that. And thank you for sharing. I think it's, really courageous for you to even talk about therapy, because I think therapy has such a big stigma, especially in the Asian culture, and
Yeah.
oftentimes we think that if you see a therapist, you need help. But I definitely agree with you. I think everyone should see a therapist, because there's so many things that happen to us and situations that happen to us that we just can't comprehend or understand. And having someone help us, peel down those layers to better understand ourselves, better understand how we can take care of ourselves, to give more self-love, right? It makes all the difference. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think I was doubly skeptical of therapy because I'm from the Midwest and I'm Asian, right?
Mhm.
And part of me was like, well, you're so lucky, like you have a great family, you have a career, like why do you, like, you shouldn't feel bad, you shouldn't feel sad, like what's wrong with you?
Right.
Um, but I think I'm glad that it's getting less stigmatized, because I think it's important, and the way I look at it is it's like a personal trainer for your mental health, right? Like, some people might not need it, right? Like, some people can take care of the bodies and they know how to exercise without hurting themselves. But then if you're not careful, you can really hurt yourself doing your own workout, right? And to have someone, and especially if you've gone through trauma or you're going through like emotional tough times, like it's like you're injured. It's like your knee, like it's like you tore your ACL, right? And if you're not going with someone who know, if you don't know exactly what you're doing, like you might just have permanent damage in your leg. But to like actually work with someone, like you can actually heal and become you know a happier and more fulfilled person. And I think it's you know absolutely shouldn't be something to be ashamed of.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And thank you for continuing to speak up on that. We try to touch upon like mental health a lot, because at the end of the day, we're all human. and we have different emotions. You can't just write high all the time. We have our low moments, and you can never understand or judge what people are going through, because everyone has their own battles that they're facing, right? And I guess the next question I have for you is your creative process. Like, we were listening to your music pretty much all morning long. So we're like, okay, like, and it's something that we jam with. We listened to your music in the past before, and we definitely noticed the change of your evolution as a person. So like, let's talk about your creative process, right? Like, how do you come up with the music that you do? And is there a particular feeling that you look for? Because we talk to other artists, they're like, I'm looking for happiness, I'm looking for sorrow. I broke up my girlfriend again to get that emotion back. I'm like, okay, it's kind of extreme, you know? Well, like for you, like what is your creative process like?
It's changed over the years, but I think fundamentally it always to me it can start in different places, but usually it's away from the computer. Given that that's how I learned how to make music and learned how to write. And so I will get a seed of something from somewhere. It can be a line, a lyric that pops in my head. It can be a melody. Sometimes it's like a sound that I make. But it really is just a kind of bottom up where you're like, oh, this is kind of cool. What comes next? Oh, okay, does this fit? Okay, this is cool. What comes next? And it's always this process of like what would be cool. And early on it was a lot of like learning, like how do I like learning the craft of it. Like I hear a sound in my head, but I don't know how to make it. Like how do I do that? And so it was a lot of like twisting knobs and, like just playing around with software to try to learn what the fuck you're doing. But now, like the longer I've been doing it, I have a better grasp on like rough things that I know like the rough path to get to where I want it to sound. It's really important to have that element of I have no idea what I'm doing, and you need that process of discovery. And so, now it's kind of a point where on Heavy Glow, my album, they all started with sort of the song and the melody and the lyrics. A lot of it was started at the piano behind me. And when I write, it's pretty subconscious. I don't necessarily know what I'm writing about, but it's always this like, okay, what comes next? And then a lot of times I'll write a song and then I'll be like, I don't really know what this is about yet, but then it'll, kind of reveal itself later, which is like the fucking magical part of songwriting. And then after I have like sort of the soul of the song in my head, I'll record some stuff on my computer and then start adding the production and just kind of keep going back and forth. And it's always just like, okay, what's cool? Like, what do I need here? What do I want to hear here? What am I feeling here? And there's no like, I've learned that you can't like force it into like, oh, I want this to be a progressive house song. Like, oh, I want this to be a banger. Oh, I want it to be this. Because once you do that, you're kind of just filling in the blanks, and it always comes out kind of uninspired and stale. So it really is just like what's exciting to me right now, what's interesting, what does this need, and just you just keep following that until you have to turn it in.
So amazing. Brian and I are probably the least musically talented people. So it's just amazing hearing your creative process when you're making music. And I love the fact that you say that you can't like put it into one bucket. You just have to kind of like let it flow, Wait, so how much time does it take on average, like, for that whole process? I know you can't really put it into like a timeline, but I'm just really curious, like on average, how long would that usually take?
I take much longer than most producers, I think. If I can get a song done start to finish in a month, that's very fast for me. But I also work in parallel where I'll work on different, I'll work on the vocal to one song while I'm doing the production drums on another song, and just to keep it fresh. But I'd say on average, it's like 6 to 8 weeks of like full-time work per song. Sometimes it can be faster. I think the fastest I ever did something was like 2 weeks, maybe. And then some songs take years. So it really depends, but it's you know, and I spend a lot of times on songs that don't end up becoming, you know, don't end up coming out. So there's a lot of it's hard to say, but I started working on Heavy Glow probably in 2019. So, you know, took
That's
me like,
amazing.
you know, 18 months to get it all done probably.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we know that you've played at small clubs and extremely big festivals like Beyond, and like we mentioned, you're about to play at the upcoming EDC. Is there one in particular between playing at small venues versus big festivals that you enjoy performing at, and why?
They're both just different animals. Playing at small, more intimate clubs is awesome because you can really feel the sort of you can really make a personal connection with fans. Like you can see them, you can, you know, you really feel that energy and you know they're there for you, which is always you know, is always very special. Festivals are, you know, they're incredible, right? Just the sheer sort of magnitude of it all and like seeing everyone there. There is this sense that like at the smaller venues, you're like, okay, I'm gonna go and be me. And then at festivals, there's a little bit of a, I'm gonna show these motherfuckers what I can do, right? Because they might not know who I am.
Yeah.
So the energy you bring into it is a little bit different, but they're like, you know, they're both they both have their own kind of character, and you know, I love both of them. So
I love it. I love it. Um, I want to take this question a little bit off tangent and make it kind of fun. So tell us about a fun story about you being a rocker DJ on stage and having fans come up to you. Because what I'm visualizing is like a crazy after party in the back. It's like, hey guys, come to the back, let's meet all the girls. Like, woo, Elephante! Tell us a fun story.
uh honestly, I'd have to go pretty far back just because, you know, recently it's when when you've toured as much as I have, like you learn to like preserve your body and like you don't really party anymore. Like it's most of the artists I know who have been doing it a long time, at some point they're like, I just can't do this anymore. Um, but you know, there's just like cool random things that happen. Like, you know, I would like you play a show and like Waka Flocka shows up, and then you're like hanging out with like Waka Flocka and smoking a blunt with him in the green room or whatever. Um, you know, like I met a couple NFL players at like at an after party after a show, or you know, just like cool random like. For me, it's so much about the show now, where it's like that's my moment, and like I can't like I I can't be partying because I have an early flight and I'm, you know, I'm just too old for this shit. But no, I think it's you know, I think the special thing for me is always when you're playing a lot, you can take it for granted, but then when you're bringing your friends and they're like going backstage for the first time, you're like, oh, this actually is pretty cool, and you're not just like this another fucking night. So
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. You're so I love this entire interview. You're so wholesome. That's all I gotta say. So what are
it
your
didn't used to be. I'm doing my best.
so I guess like what are your goals like moving forward? Where do you see yourself in the next year or 2 or 5 years? And where do you want to take your partnership, signing with 88 Rising and whatnot? That's gonna be great for your career. Like where do you see yourself and what are your goals in the next couple of years?
I think I'm at a point where I don't really set or I don't really set concrete career goals anymore. Um, I think the pandemic was a big, you know, wrench in a lot of people's plans, to put it lightly. Um, but to me, it's just like my North Stars. I just want to make better and better music, and get it out to as many people as I can, and you know, just want to make as big of an impact with people with the music and the art of it. Um, the industry is so fickle and so out of your control. You never know which way trends are going to go. You never know what's going to be popular a year from now, what song's going to take off. And when you're chasing that, it can be it can just be really tough, right? Because so much of it's out of your control. And so for me, it's just continuing to be a better artist, make cooler music videos, make better music, be a better singer, be a better guitarist, be a better songwriter, and just focus on the things I can control and just create better art. Particularly for me, because I feel like, the culture on the music industry always goes in cycles, and right now we're in this cycle of where everything is so micro, like TikTok clip. Like you need the 10-second TikTok clip. You need that like viral video. You need to grab everyone's attention span is so short. You need to make things memeable, and to me, that's not. I'm more of like a long form artist. I still care about albums. I still care about narratives and these longer form things, and it's just staying true to that and finding art that I'm excited about making, and continuing to make it and get it out to people.
Love that. Well, we're so excited for all of the upcoming things that you have in the next year. And I love that you focused on, yourself, because when you really focus on bettering yourself and becoming a better person, it's, the only person that you have to compete with is yourself to become better and better each year. And I love that you exemplified that. So should we do a fun question?
Yeah, we'll do a fun question. I mean,
let's do a fun question.
I'm gonna ask you a question. So we watched your old YouTube videos from 3-4 years ago, and we always noticed your hair is constantly blonde, right? Mm-hmm. Who came up with that look? One day you woke up, I'm gonna be blonde, I'm gonna stay blonde forever. And like, have you been recognized? What was the first feeling like when you've been recognized at like a normal place where you're just getting boba or eating burrito, and you're like, are you Elephante? Like, what was that moment like for you? And how'd you come up with the blonde hair concept? And if for you guys who are listening to the podcast, he's also wearing like a yellow-ish type of sweater to match the swag. So how do you come up with the whole look that you have right now?
Again, there's no like master plan. I was going on tour in 2017, and I was like, yeah, fuck it, I'm a DJ. Like, I'm gonna bleach my hair, and just kind of did it. And then was like, oh, this is my management at the time was like, they were kind of pissed because they're like, bro, we just we just did an album cover where you have black hair, and like now no one recognizes you. I was like, I don't know what to tell you. But now it's just it kind of started on a whim, and then I was like, I'll keep it up for a while, and then now it's like kind of like it just feels like part of who I am. And it, like, I look at old pictures of me in black hair and I'm like, I don't even recognize that person. So it really just started off kind of randomly on a whim, and it kind of went from, and it's just kind of stuck around. As for the recognizing thing, it's I can't remember when it happened first, but it's definitely kind of a surreal thing. It's good for your ego, that's for damn sure. And it happened a lot more once I started bleaching my hair, so maybe that's why I kept it. But no, I think it's always great. It's something like I appreciate when that fans want to say hi. It does get a little weird when you're like in an airport bathroom and like someone's trying to take a picture with you. Then I'm like, I'm gonna get out of the bathroom first. Like, but usually it's like, it's very chill, and everyone I've talked to is by and large like super nice.
It's a great look, by the way. We like it a lot.
Thank you.
It looks really good. I have to get your hair care products and shampoo, because you keep that blonde in there so well.
It's a lot of effort. There's a lot of products.
I bet.
But I have a great stylist in LA who like comes every 6 weeks and just like gives me a fucking bunch of shit to, it's like, use this and this and this, and then I always forget to use something, and he'll always yell at me. It's like, you got to use the balm, and I'll be like, all right, I'm sorry, I'll do better.
That's hilarious. Okay, well, thank you so much, Elefante. We just want to ask, where can our listeners find out more about you and your music, and how can they go online to like support your music and support you?
I'm on all the social medias. My handles are I am the Elefante for Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I'm just Elefante on TikTok, and all my music is out on all the DSPs: Apple Music, Spotify, Amazon Music, Deezer. You can find all my music there. And my new album, Heavy Glow, is coming out. It might be out by the time this podcast comes out. So definitely look out for that.
Awesome. Well, it was amazing having you on our podcast today, Tim. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Thanks for having me. This was a blast.
Thank you so much, Tim. We appreciate it.
Appreciate you guys.
I mean, Elefante. Yeah, man. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.